Welcome to episode 234 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, we're talking about how to not only survive data meetings, but thrive and make them genuinely useful for your practice. Visit truthforteachers.com to get an easy-to-read, easy-to-share blog post version of this podcast episode, and get a sneak peek at our new Truth for Teachers Writers Collective that's launching soon. Teachers, if you need inspiring science and math lessons for grades K-8, try Generation Genius for free. You'll get instant access to hours of fun and engaging videos covering over 200 topics that students will actually love. Every video comes with a ton of resources, including lesson plans, discussion questions, exit tickets, activities, and more. Generation Genius is used in over 20,000 schools, and you can get a free month's trial at generationgenius.com/truth. That's generationgenius.com/truth. If you missed out on the 40-hour teacher workweek program this summer, check out the 6-week fast track version. It gives you just the most impactful strategies for streamlining and simplifying your workload as a K-12 teacher. All the materials are released up front so you can work at your own pace and you never lose access to the course. It's discounted to $39 right now, and it includes all my favorite tips and resources from the full year program for organization, email management, lesson planning, grading, and more. Go to 40htw.com and click on Fast Track. You'll also see the 40-hour instructional coaching and 40-hour leadership programs for school admins there. If you believe in making teaching a more sustainable career path by finding that overlap between what's best for kids and what's best for educators, go to 40htw.com and you can learn more about the different 40-hour workweek programs. So I'm talking today with Melissa Forbes. She is a high school job skills teacher and a liaison for an alternative education jobs partnership. She's also a writer who shares both her experiences in the classroom and out of the classroom. Melissa has taught English, journalism, and work experience, and she coordinated a high school dual enrollment program. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Master's of Arts in Liberal Studies. Like all of my guests this season, Melissa is also a writer on the Truth for Teachers Collective. She wrote a post about surviving data meetings that I just knew we needed to expand on and discuss here on the podcast. If you have felt that burning rage inside you as you sit through yet another inefficient, unproductive meeting, or if you find that meetings to discuss student progress always turn into complaining and defeatist rants, or if you wish that you could just make necessary meetings less painful and maybe even valuable, Melissa has some really practical tips and mindset shifts to help you. We'll talk about what to do before data meetings, what to do during, and what to do after to ensure that they're a better use of your time. So I think you have some really great tips here to make these meetings more valuable. And there are 3 things that you recommend doing before the meeting. They are give your students an independent task, bring a question, and prepare as you've been asked to prepare. Can you explain each of these recommendations?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So the first thing that I would like to suggest is giving students an independent task that they will complete right before your data meeting. And what this does is this gives you time to transition from teacher mode into colleague mode. So here's what I mean by that. So in our classrooms, we are the boss. You know, our students' learning, their safety, their schedules, all of that is 100% on our own shoulders. But the stance that we take into a data meeting is really different. Like in that space, I am not in charge. I'm an equal. I'm a collaborator. But I find it challenging to shift into that role quickly. So like, for example, I wonder if you've ever had this happen. You know, I might run to the grocery store right after school, and suddenly I find myself talking to a complete stranger as though I'm their teacher, right? Like, I'm like, oh, let me help you find that dragon fruit. I know right where that is, you know? And so that is teacher mode. Well, teacher mode is not what's helpful in a data meeting. A data meeting requires you to occupy a different role. I think it's one where you're listening more and leading less. So what I do is I try to intentionally transition out of leading and into collaboration. So what I do is I give my students an independent task that they can complete just right before my meeting. And so that gives me like the headspace to shift those roles. So what I do at that time is I look over my notes from the previous meeting, and then I glance at the other two things that I like to do before a data meeting, the two things that you mentioned, which is try to bring a question and then also prepare as I've been asked to prepare. So first, the question. Now, I feel like this may seem obvious, but my question should be focused on data, or at least data related. So we all know, no surprise here, data meetings can veer off track very easily. It is not at all uncommon for my team to spend time talking about student specific concerns or upcoming school activities or great place to find a cup of coffee, So if I bring a legitimate question to my team, this actually helps keep me from veering off track. I've got that question in front of me that I know I want to ask at some point during the meeting. And, it also just helps me get something out of the meeting, even if the rest of the content isn't all that helpful. So now I feel like the time has been beneficial for me. So question examples are things like, maybe asking advice for restructuring a test question, for my second language learners, maybe help for reaching out to a parent with some not so great test results, things like that. Those are both data related, and both of them would honestly help me. So that's one thing that I do to prepare for my meeting, pick that question to bring to my team. And then the other thing that I do is more challenging, and this might be really the toughest piece of advice that I have to bring to you today. And that is prepare for the meeting the way you've been asked to prepare for the meeting. And I get that this is so hard if you're not on a well-functioning team, or if you don't respect the person who's setting those requirements for you, or if you're already stressed and overworked, right? Like these all sound familiar. But the reason that I advocate for this is because preparing the way that you've been asked to prepare can really improve your own mindset. And this is why. You are a professional educator, and professional educators, even ones who are operating in a setting that might not be professional, or maybe it's even dysfunctional, you're still a professional. So I say take the high road, bring the test results, crunch the numbers, fill out the forms, do all the things that you've been asked to do. And so, even though this can feel time consuming or even pointless, there are times, I have to admit, that my data meeting prep actually does make me stop and think about a student or a skill or a test in a new way. Plus, the self-esteem boost that I get from being my most professional self is totally worth it.
Those are such great tips. And it sounds like a lot of it is about focusing on what you can control and having your own goal and purpose for the meeting. So everyone there is there to accomplish something. But in addition to those team goals, you also have something that you're hoping to get out of it. And that way you have total control over whether or not you're able to get that information or leave feeling like you learned a specific thing. Am I saying that in a way that makes sense?
That is absolutely right. There's a lot about data meetings that we cannot control, and that is, maybe my biggest piece of advice is to think about what you can control, work hard on that. And then, you're going to then walk away with at least something, right?
Exactly. Okay, so let's talk about what to do during the data meeting so it feels like a more valuable use of time. Can you share those tips with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got 4 suggestions to try out during a meeting. So first, as hard as this can be, I suggest giving your full attention to the meeting. In other words, resist the temptation to grade, to check email, to update your to-do lists. Give your colleagues your attention, which I really think will then transmit to giving them your respect. So I have to confess, I used to be the absolute worst offender about this, right? Like there is just so much work to do and it's relentless.
Hmm.
And so, I couldn't help myself from trying to tackle a little bit of it in my weekly data meeting. But eventually what I realized is that by bringing work to my meeting, well, now I'm actually doing 2 things poorly. I'm not attending to my data meeting and I'm not doing the work that I brought into it well, right? I cannot multitask. I just end up feeling kind of uneasy and unsettled. So my thinking here is that, if your data meeting is in trouble, there's probably a lot of reasons why. But one thing I do know that if you check out and do other work, your data meeting isn't going to get any better. Like, this is not a step towards solution. And you'll just end up with a headache from trying to multitask. So yeah, try to really focus and be present for your data meeting.
These are two tasks that require concentration, like grading or email and attending to the meeting. And I think it just makes you feel so stressed when you're trying to do both at the same time. Did you feel that way?
Absolutely. I completely agree. When my younger self was just convinced I could multitask, I really no longer think that that's the case. And I get, like when you're in the classroom, to a certain extent, you are having to pay attention to multiple things at one time. But data meeting work and lesson planning work and grading work, these are deep concentration tasks. And I really think each of them deserves your full attention. And otherwise, like you just said, you can't do it. Your brain's not wired that way.
Yes. What else can teachers do during the data meeting?
My second suggestion is my during the meeting suggestion is to volunteer to be the note taker. So I actually came up with this idea a few years back when I was part of an unhelpful team. And so I was frustrated and angry a lot of the time in these meetings. And, I'm also not great at sitting still, with my hands kind of folded in my lap. And I think that that's true of teachers. You're just exiting this space where you're doing anything but sitting still, right? And
Right.
so I had this anger. I couldn't sit still. And I thought, you know what? Maybe I could be the note taker. So I volunteered to do it. Nobody else on the team wanted to do it. So I became the person who, I just filled out that Google Doc for our group each week. And it really turned out to be such a life-saving measure for me. So it let me keep my head in the game, but keep my snarky comments out, because I was busy taking notes. And so I left each week feeling a lot less angry and frustrated than I had from before. I do want to mention a caveat about this, though. I will say that it's really hard to be the note taker and also bring your own voice into the meeting. So if you're in an angry or frustrated place like I was, taking notes is a really good temporary solution, until things are better in your meeting. But once you are in a better place, I think it's really important that you bring your own voice back to your team. So idea number 3. So speaking of hard meetings, when I get frustrated in a meeting, I've learned to take a moment to notice my body. This is my third suggestion, is to just kind of do like a sort of a quick, almost look at myself sitting in that chair and see what I look like. So are my arms crossed? Am I breathing fast? Am I frowning? Are my hands clenched into fists? So chances are good. What I've learned is that if I'm feeling frustrated, my body is definitely mirroring that feeling. And so I've learned that just a few deep breaths are really restorative. Another trick that I've learned is that if I uncross my arms and I open up my palms, I'm signaling to my brain that now I'm open, I'm receptive. And this is so weird, but my thoughts will then just kind of follow into that positive direction. So this has been a big one for me, and I really wish I'd noticed it many years ago. It's a new skill for me. It's one that I'm still very much practicing, but I got to tell you, it's really paying off hugely. And one of the things I love most about it is that it doesn't require any extra work at all. Like, there's no preparation for me to take 30 seconds and scan my body, right? So that's been a really helpful one for me. Okay, and then my last suggestion for what to do during a data meeting is that I really want to discourage teachers from discussing specific student concerns during the actual meeting. And listen, I get that it's totally natural to do this. We care so much about our kids, right? Of course, we want to talk about what's going on with them. But I firmly believe that student issues are really best left for team meetings, grade level meetings, IEP and 504 check-ins, those kinds of things, but not data meetings. And I want to explain a little bit more about this. I feel strongly about it because I think the problem is that it can trip us up into taking the focus off of instructional practices. Or even worse, I think it can kind of lead us down the road of blaming specific kids for unfavorable test results. And I just think this is really dangerous territory. it can go something like this, right? Like, so team, I just found out that Kyle's parents are going through a divorce, and that explains why he's been so disengaged lately. And boy, I have to say too, that sure did affect my unit test results. So Angela, see what just happened? Like, now you're no longer talking about instructional practices or even how to help Kyle. Now what you've done is you've moved the responsibility for what happened on a test from the teacher to the student. You've given up your power. And so I think that a great tip for data meetings is to avoid discussing specific student concerns.
I can totally understand that. And it's easy to sort of rabbit trail off too, because
Mhm.
then it's like, oh, well, this is also happening with this kid. And then, oh, I noticed this. And now it's just sort of turning into like a venting session, which is going to
Absolutely.
drag the meeting out longer. What
Mhm.
about for schools who run data meetings to discuss specific students? Because I know there are some schools who do it that way. Like the point is to actually dig down deeper into the data and create a plan of action to support each student. What would you say about that in terms of making that valuable?
Yeah, and I think that when your school is looking at it from that approach, that's really healthy. Like, now what you're doing is you're closely aligning what you're seeing in the numbers with how to create interventions, right, for those specific students. And if that's the reality in your school, I think that that's actually a great scenario. So in my own school, what we've done, this is kind of interesting, is what we've done is we've moved to a model where what we do is we discuss data twice a month. And then in the other 2 weeks, we address specific student concerns. So we've kind of separated it out that way, and that's working pretty well for us. So our lead teacher just displays a Google Doc with student names up on the smartboard, and as we talk about our concerns, he just kind of takes notes. We've got a column for action items, and then as a group, we just kind of figure out what the next best steps are.
So, how about after the meeting? What can be done to really maximize that expenditure of time?
I love that you said that. Maximize the expenditure of time. That's really good because we don't have a lot of time, right? So I think that it's so important to think about how we are using our time in the best way that we have. So let me share 3 ideas with you that I do after the data meeting. And then, and I'll try to relate those to why I think that this is a good use of my time, right? So when I return back from my data meeting, typically various things are happening. My head might be swirling with ideas and to dos. I might need a bit of a breather after perhaps something, a discussion that didn't go as well as I thought maybe it could have. I might be feeling overwhelmed because I've been asked to take on more work. So, what I suggest is really similar to one of my before the meeting suggestions, which again is allow yourself a few minutes to transition from one space to the next, and also to capture your thoughts from the meeting, like while they're fresh. So, a great way to do that is again, just be sure you're planning a brief, independent activity for your students. So, I mean, we all know our kids need to function independently at various points throughout the day anyway. So, don't feel any guilt about this. I think that teachers likely already plan several independent activities for kids. I would just suggest making sure that one of those activities coincides with the few minutes right before the data meeting and that another one occurs immediately after. This is easier, I will have to admit, if you're teaching in middle school or high school where the group of kids that you're seeing before and after are probably a different group. That's going to be a little bit more challenging, in the K6 or the K5 setting. But I think it's doable, because I know that teachers of those younger students are definitely working towards a lot of goals that reflect student independence. Okay, totally different direction. Another suggestion that I have is something that I've been doing for years now, and it's really worked weirdly well, which is to compliment a colleague. So this surprisingly can really pay off in a mind shift set about data meetings. So here's my suggestion. Think about something that a colleague said during the meeting that you liked. You're just like, oh, that was cool. Or, maybe something that you found thought provoking or something that just piqued your curiosity. And then later in the day, just send them a quick email to say so. Hey, I like that forum you created for tracking site works. Or what you said about using YouTube videos, that really got me thinking. Just a short email, but wow, I think it's amazing to notice how doing that lifts your own mood, particularly after a more challenging data meeting.
Hmm.
So yeah, and then I think the other payoff that begins to happen is that when you make this a regular practice, you begin to notice something interesting happening, which is that you start looking for positive moments during the data meeting. And this is the kind of mindset change that I think can have enormous impact. So, and then my last suggestion is this. Soon after the data meeting, I think it's really wise and a good use of your time to actually email your team leader and your administrator. Sum up those tasks that you said you were going to complete, ask any clarifying questions that you have, establish some reasonable completion dates, and this tip again goes back to the professionalism that I talked about earlier. This is not about more work to do, although I know it can feel like it initially, but this is really more about acknowledging your professional role in your team and attending to it. So you take a couple minutes, jot down what you need to do and when you're going to do it. And the payoff here is that this is going to free you up to give your students your full attention as you shift back into instructor mode. Your kids then notice a happier, more relaxed you, which has the wonderful effect of making you happier and more relaxed.
So what you're doing basically is you're kind of like clearing all of those hanging threads out of your
Yep.
brain, like writing them down, establishing your concrete actions, any kind of summaries, any kind of like closure sort of.
Exactly right. Exactly right. You're giving yourself the headspace to get back into instructor mode. That's absolutely right. And to do it well and not have these background tasks sort of nagging at you. Like, hey, email Sarah about the YouTube video, jot down the things I agreed to do in the meeting, and then get back to my classroom and then maybe send those emails right after work.
Let me ask you this. We've talked a lot about like what's within your own locus of control. You've also experienced some really well-run meetings. So I wonder if you could just share briefly, what are the qualities that make a data meeting really useful and valuable so that anyone who is listening who may be an administrator, a team leader, or someone who's a classroom teacher who's thinking, you know what, I want to shift the norms. I want to make this better for everyone. I'm going to try to teach my colleagues to also use these same individual strategies. And then I want to see what we can do to actually change the culture of our meetings. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a big one. I'm going to answer the question in two parts. First, I'll say that yes, I have been so fortunate to work on at a school where data meetings were incredibly helpful. Really, really fulfilled their mission, which is that they improved my instruction and they improved my students' learning. Like that is ultimately the goal. And what I saw in that school were really three things. First of all, trust among the members of the team. We all really knew and understood one another and trusted each other well enough that we could be vulnerable and bring our results and be able to talk about them in a way that was going to ultimately benefit our kids. Second thing that we had was really a well-cast vision from administration for our school. So from the very top down, we understood exactly how our data meetings were going to drive student learning, right? And so that came all the way down through our school. And data meetings was just one way that our school did such a great job of casting a vision for exactly how, the work could help. But it was a really key one. And then the last way is just administrative support. You have to have the time and the space to meet. And that can look like so many different things, but maybe it looks like you don't necessarily have an administrator hovering. Maybe they trust you to be professional and to get the work done. Or it can look like common planning periods. It can look like, if they want you to spend more time in such a setting, they're going to provide substitute teachers or teacher classes themselves to give you the time and the space to really do a great job at the work. So I think that answers the first part of your question, which is, what does it look like? Like, what are you getting from your school in order to have a really well-functioning data team? But the second piece I want to talk about is this issue of control, right? And what you can and cannot change. So, before I sat down with you today, I actually talked to a lot of teachers about data meetings. And the avalanche of negative comments that I got about them, it really wasn't surprising, right? Like, I don't think that that's going to be a surprise to anybody. But what I found interesting is how stuck we all feel. Like, we both don't like data meetings and we don't know what to do to improve them. So here's really the main thing that I would like to say, which is that the success or failure of data meetings does not fully rest on your shoulders. Like, go ahead and release that responsibility. Like, it is not up to any one teacher to fix what's wrong with the data meeting, because it goes back to some of those things that I talked about before, which are largely out of a teacher's control. But a big, big, big caveat here is what you can control is your own choices, your own mindset. And this is where you can make improvements. And I think that those improvements can impact you as a teacher, which is a huge payoff, but can even trickle into what you were talking about earlier, which is a better culture and a better outcome for your team. So, I would just suggest try an idea for a while. Not working for you, try another one. I would treat this topic like you do your own teaching, which is that you monitor and adjust. So I think that over time, if you start paying attention to this and tweaking your own behavior, your own actions, you'll make some discoveries that will work for you. Now, will those discoveries help your team overall? Maybe they will, and that would be great. But I do want to encourage teachers to let go of the responsibility to fix their data team. I would say focus instead on improving your own mindset about data meetings through a couple of small, specific actions. And then, maybe one day you'll find yourself not only surviving your data meetings, but even possibly looking forward to them and thriving in them.
That's such an important distinction between feeling this personal responsibility that I have to make this meeting better. I have to change it. I'm responsible for making sure that it's valuable versus I'm just responsible for the energy that I bring.
Yes.
I'm responsible for showing up present, focused, proactive, solution-oriented, ready to work and get this done, to be efficient. I'm not responsible for how everyone else shows up, but my own energy and the way that I conduct myself in the meeting impacts other people. Emotions are contagious, feelings are contagious, and I can show up and be snarky and eye-rolling and grade my papers, as I think we've all had moments where we do because we're human. And, it takes a level of calm inside to be able to show up like that. And we're not going to be able to do it all the time. But I love this idea of really thinking about who am I in this meeting?
Right.
How am I representing myself? What am I here to accomplish? How can I create something positive and useful and valuable for myself and for my team members? And I do think that consistency in showing up that way over time, even if it's not every time, it raises the bar for what's acceptable in the meeting. And I think others will begin to mirror your actions.
Yep, I think you're absolutely right. I think what you said about feelings being contagious is dead on. And when you come, I would say that in the beginning of me trying to shift my own focus here, I was very okay, well, I'm not getting anything out of this. So what little bit could I at least get for me? So maybe that's a good baby step is what can I at least grab out of this for me? But then as you begin to get something out of the meetings and shift your mindset, then like you said, that positive, calm, solution-oriented vibe can be very, very winsome, to the other people on your team. They will be attracted to it, and you modeling it may have the effect of bringing out the best selves in your colleagues too.